My name is Ildefonso Ortiz. If you look for my stories on Brietbart, you'll find me under my name, Ildefonso Ortiz. Poncho is just what my friends call me, so feel free to call me Poncho. So I've been researching, investigating organized crime for the last 10 years or so. There's one thing I'm going to tell you. The U.S., we have all these law enforcement agencies, technology, equipment, but the ones that actually have the operational control of the border are the drug cartels. Right here we're in McAllen, Texas. Just south of us is Reynosa. Well, there's that river, and the ones that actually control that river is called the Gulf Cartel. Now, right now we've been making headlines because there's a immigration crisis here. We have thousands of people coming in every day. Everybody talks about caravans. Well, the problem is that here in the McAllen area, the average is about 1,200 people coming in per day.
Wow.
Now, if you look at a week's worth, that's one of the caravans. I mean, the first caravan was 5,000 people, and all the news outlets went crazy over that. Well, that's just a week's worth here in McAllen. We're in part to break the historic records, of immigration. So let's talk about the cartels. They've been here for decades. Sadly, a lot of our public officials on the U.S. side and on the Mexican side have been involved with them. So what do they control? They control not only drugs. Everybody thinks about drugs. They do control drugs, but currently the Gulf Cartel makes more money from human smuggling than they do from drug trafficking.
Wow.
We've all seen the images, the women and the children coming in seeking asylum, seeking a better life. Each one of those individuals has to pay here between $300 and $500 to the Gulf Cartel to be allowed to cross through that river. The Gulf Cartel has the operational control of the border. The news outlets tend to kind of push the whole humanitarian side about the immigration problem. The issue is this: it's more humane to have.
Speak up, please, because I'm sitting here and I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, well, so the news outlets tend to push the whole humanitarian side about things. What they tend to leave behind is the horrors that take place in Mexico. Most of the women that will come through this, that will reach the border, they will be abused. Most of the migrants will be abused one way or another. Females usually will be sexually abused. That is the reality of the immigration crisis that we have here in this area. Drug trafficking continues to be a big issue, but sadly, the Mexican government has been complicit with the drug cartels for decades. Here in Texas, we're talking about the Rio Grande Valley, Cameron County, Stark County, and Hidalgo County. In the last 15 years, we have had 5 border sheriffs that have gone to prison for for cooperating with organized crime. Those are some of the realities. If anybody has questions, I'll be glad to take questions. Now, with Brietbart, we've been covering this for years. Brandon, Darby, and I started this project called the Cartel Chronicles. In Mexico, news outlets are not allowed to cover cartels. They're not allowed to talk about what's really happening in their communities. What we did is we went over there and we found the people that are willing to speak about it, willing to report on that, and we brought them into our team. And basically, through us, they're able to report the horrors that are going on in Mexico. We're here in McAllen, Texas, beautiful city, safe city, or we have the appearance of safety. 6 miles that way is the river. Just south of there is a battleground. We're talking about convoys of gunmen that will roll into Reynosa, and I'm talking about 12 SUVs full of gunmen with machine guns, grenades, you name it, and they will clash with rival convoys of gunmen in the middle of the street. That is happening in Reynosa. Reynosa, which is a city that is much beloved in this area because of the manufacturing plants, international trade. A lot of the goods that we buy here are manufactured parts of it in Mexico. That is why politicians like to say the border is safe, nothing bad is happening, but they only look on the northern side. Sadly, every major border city in Mexico has a security problem, and this is why. International bridges, ports of entry, that is, it used to be the corridor for drugs. Those areas are still wide open. There's, whatchamacallit, right here, we're gonna go to Roma. There is nothing but a shallow river. So drugs will come in either through the bridge, through the river, and there's nothing to stop it. Right here in this area with the humanitarian crisis, the issue is this. In previous years, people will come in from Mexico and other countries. They would enter the country, and then the U.S. would capture them or they would be deported. The problem is that the cartel found a way to game the system. Now people from Central America, countries other than Mexico, they come in here, they turn themselves into Border Patrol, they are processed and they are released because they request asylum. There is nothing that can be done right now with the legal system. They are gaming the system and they are the ones that are making a profit. Simple as that. Our Congress, by not doing anything, they're allowing this to continue.
Yeah.
And this is one area where, because of the geographic location, there's a river. Okay, let me go back. You guys remember the first caravan?
Yeah.
Everybody was talking about the first caravan, the news outlets were all over that. Well, they didn't come through here. They went to California. Why was that? They did not want to initially deal with the drug cartels that were in this area. They went 3 times the distance to Tijuana. They found a big obstacle. There was a fence there. They couldn't set foot on U.S. soil and request asylum. Now they're coming through here because even though they're paying the cartels, just to cross this river, $300 to $500, just for the river. I'm not talking about the rest of the journey. They pay those $300, but they have a guaranteed entry into the U.S. The moment they cross the river and they set foot on U.S. soil, they say, I'm here, I request asylum, and there is nothing that our law enforcement agencies can do to prevent that. Just because of the way the system is set up. They're gaming the system and that's all they're doing. Yes?
So, most of those people can't afford that money. If there's multiple people in their family, what happens to them once they get over here? Do they owe the cartel money? What's going on with that?
Well, people, they're forced to either sell everything they have back home, they have relatives pay for it, or a large majority of them have relatives up north. And they use remittance services, Western Union and money transfer service to send money from New York, Chicago, Delaware, anywhere to the cartel in Reynosa or Nuevo Laredo, wherever we're at, to be allowed to cross that river. It's all about money. There's despite what people will tell you, this is not about, the cartels don't care about feelings, humanitarian issues or not. They're in it for the money. This is a business. For them, these people are basically cargo that's gonna make them money. So, let me just go over some numbers. We're talking about, and these are Border Patrol statistics, about 1,100 to 1,200 people per day coming through here. If these people are paying $300 to $500 per head to cross, just to be able to claim asylum, let's do the math. $300 times 1,100 per day. How much are we talking about?
It's a lot of money. In the wrong business.
And that's the whole immigration issue right there.
Crazy. Wow.
But you know what? It really doesn't matter because when they come over here, we give them everything. They don't have to worry about food. They don't have to worry about medical because we put them on Section 8 housing, Medicaid, dental, everything. So, I mean, it's cheap for them to pay that money and they get over here and they're all subsidized by the taxpayers.
And here's the thing. Once they're captured by Border Patrol, they're processed, they're released, and then they're free to go wherever they want to.
Exactly.
Now, one of the problems here is that the Mexican government, the Mexican immigration authorities have been complicit in this for years. Here's what's happening right now. Mexico says they're being proactive in immigration right now, but what they're doing is this. You cross the border from Guatemala into Chiapas, you turn in yourself to Mexican immigration authorities. They will give you a visa or a permit of sorts, where you have 6 months, or 30 days to 6 months to leave Mexico.
Wow.
That's it. You're free to travel through Mexico. all you had to do was pay immigration authorities in Mexico. And so in reality, Mexico is, well, we're documenting people, but no, they're just giving them a free access to.
Pushing them along.
In some of the caravans in the past, Mexico's government has bused people to the border cities. We saw it in Coahuila, where the Coahuila government bused people across the states to Piedras Negras, just south of Eagle Pass. In that particular case, it was about 2,000 people that were bused across the state. We have Mexican federal police that have been escorting the caravans through Mexico. That is just the immigration side. Now, here's the funny part. Drug cartels are now making more money from these caravans and the immigration issue because Mexico's legal system will not prosecute them. There's no risk. As a drug cartel, if you're trafficking drugs, you risk arrest, fines, going to prison, being killed by police. If you're smuggling people, Mexico's immigration authorities will not prosecute you, or they'll refuse to prosecute you because it's too much hassle.
Wow.
So state officials do not have that's the federal government. At the state level, there's no law for you to be prosecuted on. So you have virtual immunity
Wow.
to be able to
That's
smuggle
what
people
service.
across Mexico. And that's just the way things are. Sadly, the Mexican government continues to be complicit in this. Now, as far as drug trafficking, Mexico's current president has said that the war on drugs is over, that he's not going to target cartel bosses like in the past,
Wow.
because he wants to bring peace to his country. What is that telling you? Well, if we've seen in the past how Mexico has been complicit with helping the drug cartels, and now the current president is saying, we're not going to go after them, we don't want to go after their boss, we don't want the violence, that's a huge red flag. Now let me bring a little bit of history. Just south of us, the state of Tamaulipas is home of the Gulf cartel and Los Zetas. I'm sure you've all heard of Los Zetas, the most brutal, sadistic cartel there is. Well, there's two former governors of Tamaulipas that have open pending cases in the U.S. for drug trafficking and money laundering. One of them is about to go to trial here. And the only reason why he's going to go to trial was because he was caught in Italy and he was extradited. The other one is in Mexico at this point, where Mexico will not allow him to be extradited.
Oh my God. Wow.
For years, that man lived happy in Mexico with government-paid protection. It wasn't until a rival politician put him in prison on other charges. And basically, so he's holding him, waiting for him to be extradited, but diplomacy.
Wow.
That's the only reason why that man is not in a U.S. prison going to trial.
Wow.
Questions, anybody? Yes.
That $300 to $500 you stated that was paid, is that just across the river, or is
That's
that for the
just
whole?
the river. I'm
just
not
the
talking
river,
about,
okay.
and that applies only to people from Central America. Now, if we're talking about somebody from Mexico, the last rate that I heard was $8,000 to cross you. But because you're from Mexico, you're deportable, so they'll put you in Houston. And that is one of the rates that I've heard. Now, if you're from another country, say you're from Africa, Middle East, now you're talking about tens of thousands. And those are different arrangements that are made. So right here we're in the Rio Grande Valley, people from Central America it's more difficult to deport them because they're going to be basically catch and release. Those are the $500 from the city of Reynosa. You make your way to Reynosa, and then it's just to cross. Now, just west of us, there is no fence. I'm talking about, you go 12 miles west in the city of Mission, the fencing ends there. There is nothing from pretty much west of Mission, almost to Laredo. There's no fencing, it's wide open. That area is called La Ribereña. That area is a crown jewel of the Gulf cartel. That is where most of the drugs go through, and that's where most of the migrants from Mexico cross through. The problem there is this. People from Mexico that they have to hide from Border Patrol, they will cross them. They will be picked up at the river and they're taken to a stash house From there, they move from stash house to stash house in order to get past the checkpoint. Now, here's the interesting part. Their cartels are actively recruiting teenagers from our high schools because since they're under 18, they are not prosecuted at the federal level. They will catch these teens and release them. By the time they turn 18, these guys are already seasoned smugglers who are familiar with weapons. They're known smugglers. They'll smuggle drugs, humans, and this is something that we see just most of us. La Jolla High School, they have a huge problem with that. Also in Rio Grande, in the Starr County area, teenagers, they're growing up wanting to be cartel members. They're wanting to be cartel bosses.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes. Now the problem, when they pick those people up, right now we have a large contingent of DPS troopers and Border Patrol that are patrolling that area. So pretty much every day we're having high-speed chases along the highway here. There's been multiple crashes with multiple casualties. Innocent people have been killed in those crashes because you have a 15-year-old kid with a loaded van with 20 people going 80 plus miles along the highway trying to avoid the troopers with Border Patrol, and they will crash into innocent motorists. And that has happened here numerous times, and it's hardly ever reported.
Wow.
Questions?
So interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Pancho, what do you know about the United Nations helping groups come up?
The United Nations, well, not so much here in this area, right? Now, one of the things is that you mentioned the United Nations. The cartels in Mexico control the news outlets. They're able to control the narrative on certain news outlets, particularly in border cities. This happened very recently. In the border city of Nuevo Laredo, the cartels managed to create the narrative that the Mexican military was kidnapping and killing innocent people. In reality, the cartels actually dress up as the military and carry out a lot of these operations. We have a lot of cartel and cartel violence. However, the human rights representative in Nuevo Laredo was able to push that narrative and was able to dupe the UN High Commissioner into writing a letter condemning the Mexican military. He made that very public. We reported on that, basically calling out the Mexican military for targeting civilians, when in reality it was Los Zetas, and it was a campaign driven by Los Zetas. There was a raid at one of the Zetas warehouses where a lot of these banners that they were using during the protest, well, they had the banners next to the weapons during that raid. So in reality, there's a lot of controlling the narrative. Yeah, continues to be a huge issue here. Whenever you hear about Mexican police violating human rights, the Mexican army going after civilians, usually there's a cartel angle behind that.
We have been hearing a lot on Facebook. We see heads, severed heads in ice chests. Are those American citizens that are in the cartel, or are they? Who are these?
Well, the severed, that actually it's Los Zetas. They're back in the game. They came back with a vengeance. Right now, there's a very scary cartel boss called El Tori. He's actually in Nuevo Laredo right now. He's the one that's behind all those severed heads. We've actually published some very gory photos of those heads. It just depends if they're Americans or not. Sadly, we do have a lot of those teenagers that get drawn into the drug trade. Sometimes they're working for the wrong criminal organization and they end up being captured by their rivals. Just recently, I would say about 2 days ago, we published a story about a kid from La Jolla. He was a student in La Jolla back in the 90s or 90. He's 2010. He was a student in La Jolla. He was just thrown off a building in Monterrey during a drug deal gone bad. So yes, though sadly there are Texans or there are U.S. citizens amongst those cartel victims. We're talking about Eagle Pass, Piedras Negras area. Just south of Eagle Pass. There's a Piedras Negras. You go a little bit further south, there's a town called Allende, Coahuila. Between 2011 and 2013, Los Zetas cartel exterminated more than close to 500 people from that one town. By exterminating, I'm talking about kidnapping, murdering them, and incinerating them. Talking about barrels with fuel as well as ovens.
Oh,
Now we're talking, and this is from one small town, one region, and it was done basically because somebody had betrayed Los Zetas cartel, and they eradicated everybody that was a relative, a friend, a business partner. Anybody that had ties to that individual was incinerated. Homes were torched, and they were torn down with heavy machinery. Now, just west of Piedras Negras, there is a military base. The Mexican military did not do a thing about it. They allowed it to happen. Mexican authorities did not do a thing about it. They allowed it to happen. The governor at that time has been implicated in U.S. cases as having worked with Los Zetas. However, he hasn't been criminally charged. He's lost properties and cash, but he has not been criminally charged. So yes, there are some horrors. You name it, it's happened. Incinerations, people being dissolved in acid, dismemberments. An acquaintance of mine was at a local newspaper in Mexico. About 2 months ago, they left a ice chest with the body parts out of their office. There's a newspaper that was called El Mañana in Reynosa. They've been under attack. They've had an individual murder outside of their offices. They've shot off the buildings. They've thrown grenades at their buildings. And this happens just southwest.
how much land are the Zetas buying along the Rio Grande River? Because I met with a judicial judge in San Antonio, and their concern was the fact that the landowners on the American side were finding it very lucrative to sell their property, and some of them didn't really have a choice because they were given, an ultimatum to buy. I know that a lot of the property between Eagle Pass and Laredo has been sold.
Well,
And Del Rio.
That area is undeveloped. There's nothing out there. And,
No,
it's
you can't say
rural.
that. There's pecan farms out there.
Well, yes, but it's there's a minimal presence of U.S. law enforcement in that area. So farmers.
But it doesn't justify selling all
Oh.
that land to these cartels and allowing them to tell us, American citizens, that we need to sell our property, whether we want to or not.
But remember, there is our politicians continue to tell us there's nothing bad happening there. The area is completely safe. However, here's the interesting part. Cartel bosses will carry out these horrific things in Mexico, but many of them have their families and they live happily in Texas, in New
And the
Mexico,
Dominion
in
in
Arizona.
San Antonio.
Here, we actually have multiple cartel bosses that live here. I'm gonna say, if my numbers are not mistaken, since 2011, there's been 8 or 9 top-level cartel bosses from the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas that have been caught here in the Rio Grande Valley. We'll make that 9 if we count that the top Los Zetas boss was caught in Houston 3 years ago. But they have properties here, they live here. One of them was caught heading to a party at South Padre Island. Another one was caught here in Edinburgh, Texas. Actually, 3 of them have been caught in Edinburgh. Others have been caught in Brownsville. They live here. They come and go as they please. They have properties here. So our politicians can say, oh yeah, the border is safe, but in reality, everybody's afraid. Simple as that. We have them here. Yes, sir.
Has there been any of the border properties, any of the property that's right there on the border where a potential wall would go, that has been linked to being owned by any cartel to prevent walls from being built there?
Well, here's the issue. A lot of those things are done through straw purchases or things of that nature where it's very difficult to find out who actually owns what. Sadly, this area, I mean, if we look at the Rio Grande Valley, we're not a very big industrial area. I mean, there's some manufacturing plants in Mexico, a good amount of them, but they're in Mexico. People will say, well, there's a lot of commerce, but a lot of all that commerce, we're talking about shopping malls and everything. Well, those are corporations. That money doesn't stay here. We're not a big farming area. We have some farming, but not a lot. We're not a big university area. We have a couple of hospitals, but again, that's money that stays within one sector. So, where does all this development come from?
That's what I was telling you yesterday.
So, this area does have a very big presence in a very big influence of unknown cash that flows in here. I mean, look, right now we have not the current sheriff, but the previous sheriff just finished serving his federal sentence for having had his campaign bought and paid for by the cartel. His campaign was paid for. He pleaded guilty to taking cash from a cartel boss known as El Gallo, who didn't live in Mexico. He actually lived happily in Westaco, Texas, in his palace. And he actually gave cash to the former sheriff, and the sheriff actually pleaded guilty to having taken cash for his campaign. Now, if we follow that case, it's called the Panama Unit case. At that time, we had the entire narcotics unit, 3-level narcotics task force, that was carrying out drug raids and selling the drugs back to cartel people. They were pretty much, there would lights and everything that would go raid homes, say, hey, we seized 1 kilo of coke, and they would sell the rest on the side.
Wow.
Now, sadly, it wasn't just the drug task force. It was also the Crime Stoppers. In total, you had about 15 individuals that ended up pleading guilty to the case. Oh, I forgot. We also had somebody from the DA's office involved in that whole racket. We have multiple rackets now, and it's just one group. We've had Border Patrol officials tied up to this, constables, police chiefs from the various municipalities that have been tied into all this. Sadly, that's a dark cloud of corruption that hangs over this area. I'm just talking about the federal cases where people have been pleading guilty. There's still a lot of stuff that hasn't come out yet that we don't know about, but that it raises some very scary red flags.
That brings up another question. Again, along the border, property along the border, because of eminent domain arguments about you can't just take the property. Has there been any studies or any research into how much property is owned by shell companies, if you will, along the border and have developed that property with nothing on it and just left it as vacant property, which is an actual avenue for encroachment? Is there any research done so far
Not
to show
that I
the
know of.
property just sitting there blank?
Not that I know of.
Brandon, do you have social media we can all follow and we can share your stories that you get
Well, yeah.
posted?
Brandon's on Twitter.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pancho.
Brandon Darby. I am on Twitter at Ildefonso Ortiz. I am on Facebook as Ildefonso Ortiz. Also Brietbart, Texas.
Yeah, Brietbart, Texas. And then your the other one, the Cartel Crusaders.
And the Cartel
That's
Chronicles.
what I follow. Yeah, Cartel Chronicles.
Is that on Facebook?
Yes,
Yeah.
on Facebook.
Cartel?
Chronicles. And on Cartel Chronicles,
Chronicles?
we publish in English and Spanish because a lot of the stuff that happens, news outlets won't cover it in Mexico. So we're trying to kind of let people in Mexico also know what's happening in their own communities.
It's videos.
Stories, photos, some videos. Yes.
Question. So, a large group of us pretty much are just really concerned moms and dads, American citizens. What can we do to help? How do we help get the word out? What's the best thing for us to help
What
this
you doing right
community?
now?
Yeah.
Become informed.
Show up,
up.
yeah.
Talk to your friends. Let them know
Yeah.
what's really happening, because a lot of this stuff nobody talks about it. Before I joined Brietbart, I used to work at the newspapers, local newspapers, and we were covering these crazy, insane stories that are happening on the border, but they never left the area.
Yeah.
I mean, at the point where you have a sheriff, a narcotics unit, the Crime Stoppers, everybody in on different drug trafficking rackets. I mean, had that happened in another city, Atlanta or anywhere else, that would be nationwide news.
Yeah.
That didn't even make a beat.
Yeah, that's wrong.
So pretty much share these stories, talk to your people, read up on our stuff,
Yeah.
talk about it, get the word
Yeah.
out.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So did you say that part of the narrative that is going on with the, there's no crisis at the border is the fact that it sounds like majority of the violent crime is happening just over the border. So you have an American attitude of, well, that's really their problem because it hasn't seeped over
Yes, in a
this way. However, wouldn't it be a more accurate narrative to say all those people that are killing and chopping and burning and, Americans and Mexicans or South Central Americans, whoever's, getting killed, are infiltrating our border here, and it's not like, oh, well, in Mexico I have criminal activity, but America I won't. It's only a matter of time that all of that heinous violent crime will be all over America.
Well, here's the interesting part when you talk about it being safe here. So, our politicians love to say we're one community, the U.S. and Mexico, El Paso and Juarez, we're one community. But then they never want to say we're one community when it comes to the crime statistics.
Right.
Now let me talk about the crime statistics real quick. All the border cities like to say we have great statistics, we're a safe city. I'm going to go out and say that is part of my word bull. And here's why. They rely on the FBI's UCR crime report, the Uniform Crime Report. And they say, well, look, our statistics show that we're doing great. Well, those are statistics that were started in 1930. And they only look at 7 metrics to quantify how much crime there's in one city. Are there only 7 different types of crime that we're talking about? I mean, they're going to say, well, we have murder, robbery, car theft, arson, rape, and based on that, we have a great, safe area. Well, no. And here's why. Those statistics they don't cover the crimes that are particular to the border areas. They do not take into account kidnapping, extortion, drug trafficking, money laundering, I'm missing one of them, but anyway, home invasions. And what am I talking about when I say home invasions? If you were to say home invasion to somebody in New York, they would think, well, somebody breaks in and steals your TV. Well, not in the border regions. When we're talking about border cities, a home invasion, I'm talking about 12 guys with AK-47s kicking down your door, coming in to looking for drugs, cash, or to kidnap immigrants. Those are the home invasions here. The problem is that under the current statistics, there's no way to classify those. So a sheriff will tell you, look, we only had 40 robberies in our county. Well, how many of those were home invasions? How many of those were, hey, give me your wallet? And that's what they don't want to tell you.
Brandon, thank you so much for your time. He's going to be with us the rest of the day. We have some more
Bonjo.
speakers so that we can get. I'm so sorry.
He's got quite a chronology of his
Sybil, yeah. But I'm going to let Dr. Alma introduce our next speaker, Walter. But he's going to be with us all day long so that we can get moving so we can be on time today.